We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. Every morning while the city was still half asleep, the little diner, Flavors of Life, was already filled with the smell of freshly baked bread and the rich aroma of roasted coffee. The dark wooden tables had worn edges, and the glass windows were stained with time. Yet the place was always crowded, drawn by an atmosphere of warmth and familiarity that no other place could quite replicate. Inside the diner, Alicia moved gracefully in rhythm with the busy routines. Her brown hair was tied hastily at the nape of her neck, with a few loose strands falling across her cheeks. Her plain but spotless apron always had a small notebook tucked into the pocket for jotting down orders. Her hands carried faint scars from hot water burns or careless paper cuts, the marks of a girl accustomed to hard work from an early age. Yet her brown eyes still glowed with a soft light that made anyone meeting her gaze feel at ease. One noon, when the bell above the door jingled, Alicia looked up and caught sight of a stranger. Henry, tall, solidly built, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sky behind him, and eyes so deep they seemed to hold untold stories. He chose the seat by the window, where sunlight slanted through the glass and spilled across the table in a clear, bright streak. At first, Alicia thought he was just another passing customer. But then, day after day, at the same hour, he returned, always sitting in her section. I always order a simple sandwich and a cup of black coffee, and every time he left a tip twice the cost of the meal, as if it were a habit with no explanation. One day, as Alicia refilled his cup, she hesitantly asked, "Would you like more coffee?" Henry looked up. His eyes lit up for an instant before his lips curved into a calm, gentle smile. "Always." The simple reply sent an unexpected flutter through Alicia's heart. From then on, the midday cup of coffee became their little ritual. When the crowd thinned, Henry often lingered to talk. He was a literature teacher at the nearby high school. His voice was warm and low when he spoke about the books he loved, and about how his students always groaned whenever Shakespeare came up. Alicia laughed, answering with her own stories of everyday life, about the long evenings at the diner, about her grandmother, who used to place jars of wildflowers in their modest kitchen to make it feel like home. Then she shared a secret dream, that one day she would have her own flower shop. "Why flowers?" Henry asked, curiosity glinting in his eyes. Alicia smiled faintly, stirring her spoon in the cup. "Because flowers can turn moments into memories. They're fragile, short-lived, but unforgettable. They're little miracles that remind people there's always space for beauty in this world." Henry was quiet for a while, studying the young woman across from him, and in that silence, Alicia suddenly realized something. Sometimes words weren't necessary. Sometimes a look was enough to connect two souls. Love came to them that way, slowly, gently, like roots quietly reaching deep into the soil. One day, Alicia noticed that their conversations had become an essential part of her daily life, and Henry realized that every step he took leaving the diner left him strangely hollow, as though he had forgotten something important behind. Lunches soon turned into walks in the park, into late-night movies on the old couch in Alicia's tiny apartment. She discovered that Henry had a small scar on his temple, the result of a bicycle accident when he was 9. He discovered that she had the habit of humming softly while she cooked, the same melodies her mother once sang to her as a child. Each little piece of ordinary life wove together into a quiet but steady bond. One late autumn afternoon, golden sunlight streamed down the street. Alicia closed her notebook and glanced outside the window. Henry was sitting there, as always. But this time, he wasn't reading, wasn't sipping his coffee. He was simply smiling, his eyes brimming with something that made Alicia's heart skip. In that moment, she understood. Love doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it comes like a warm breeze, slipping gently into your heart until, without realizing it, it has become an inseparable part of your life. Clutching the coffee pot tightly, Alicia whispered to herself, "Maybe this is the beginning of something beautiful." And in the soft golden glow of that afternoon, their love truly began. Simple, warm, but carrying with it the hope of a future filled with happiness. That morning, the sky was a gentle shade of blue, the breeze drifting softly through the trees, carrying with it the scent of fresh grass in the lingering chill of spring. Alicia was caught off guard when Henry suddenly asked, "Would you like to take a walk with me? Somewhere special?" She only had time to nod before he smiled, a smile warm and tender, like sunlight. They arrived at the city's botanical garden. The moment they passed through the gate, Alicia was overwhelmed. The whole place was a sea of flowers, pale lavender bushes, radiant roses, rows of white daisies trembling in the wind. Birds chirped above, their song blending with the rustling leaves like a soundtrack written for this special day. Alicia turned to Henry, her eyes sparkling. "You knew I love flowers?" Henry scratched the back of his neck, a little embarrassed. "I remember you once told me about your grandmother and the little jars of wildflowers she kept in the kitchen. I thought, if flowers make you happy, then this must be the perfect place for you." They walked along the stone path, each step like wandering deeper into a painting. Alicia inhaled deeply, letting the fragrance of the flowers settle into her heart. A strange feeling passed through her, like a new chapter waiting to unfold. When they reached a patch of blooming white lilies, Henry slowed down. He glanced around, then stopped. "Alicia," his voice wavered slightly as his hand slipped into his coat pocket. "There's something I want to say." Alicia's eyes widened. Before her stood Henry, usually so calm and steady, now visibly nervous, even clumsy. From his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. His hands trembled, and he couldn't bring himself to look directly at her right away. "I'm not good with words. I don't have much, just an ordinary job and a heart full of flaws. But there's one thing I know for certain." He paused, took a deep breath. "You are my home. You are where I want to return every single day, no matter what the world outside may bring." Alicia was stunned. The garden seemed to fall silent, and only his sincere voice remained. To her, Henry was no longer just the mysterious customer at the diner, no longer just the literature teacher who spoke passionately about Shakespeare. He was the man she wanted to spend her life with. Before he could even open the box, Alicia laughed through her tears and threw her arms around him. "Yes, even if you don't say another word, my answer is yes." Henry froze for a moment, then laughed too, his eyes shining with a joy he had never felt before. He finally opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring. No gemstone, no extravagance. But to Alicia, it was the most beautiful gift in the world. A month later, they were married. No fancy restaurants, no designer gowns, just a small church on a hill and a few dozen family and friends. Alicia wore the hand-sewn white dress her mother had stitched many years before. Henry borrowed an old suit from a school friend. But when the priest asked, "Do you both vow to walk together through all of life's journey, in hardship and in joy?" Their eyes met, and the world seemed to stop. "I do. I do." They needed no grandeur, only a trembling handclasp and a simple faith. That was enough. After the wedding, when the guests had gone, the newlyweds sat together on the church steps, looking up at the starry sky. Alicia rested her head on Henry's shoulder and whispered, "Do you think we're poor?" Henry squeezed her hand firmly. "If I have you, then I'm the richest man in the world." A few weeks later, they found a small house in the suburbs. It was old, the windows warped, the paint on the walls chipped and peeling, and every step on the wooden floor creaked. But it had a large garden, overgrown with grass, shaded by an old tree spreading wide over the yard. The moment Alicia stepped inside, she whispered, "This is exactly where I want to live." Henry laughed, pulling her close by the shoulders. "Then we'll make it our home." They made plans to repaint the walls, plant flowers in the yard, and, most importantly, prepare a small room upstairs. That room would be the nursery, where Alicia imagined children's laughter, wallpaper patterned with white clouds, and a wooden crib by the window. That summer, every evening they sat on the porch, drinking iced tea, talking about their simple dreams. Henry pictured their children running barefoot through the yard, laughing with dirt-stained feet. Alicia dreamed of teaching them to grow flowers, so the house would always be filled with color. Though they were poor, though the future was uncertain, their hearts brimmed with faith. Love and hope would transform that old house into a home filled with laughter. From the day they moved into the little house in the suburbs, Alicia began a new routine. She taped a large calendar beside the refrigerator, with each square serving as a tiny frame for her hopes. A red marker sat in a ceramic cup next to the box of mint tea. Every evening after work, she would stand for a long time in front of the calendar, counting, calculating, circling days, drawing small red hearts on the best ones. You plan so carefully, even the stars and moon might start following your lead, Henry teased, stirring the soup pot with a ladle. I just don't want to miss a chance, Alicia smiled. Who knows, maybe one of these red hearts will turn into a real heartbeat. They started buying little things people often said were just for fun, to be prepared, like a thin blanket printed with white clouds, a wooden frame saved for the ultrasound picture they hoped to have one day. On Sunday mornings, Alicia eagerly flipped the calendar to a new week, while Henry set out 2 mugs of coffee, adding honey to hers to keep things sweet for what's to come. They also bought their first pregnancy tests, then a second box, neatly stacked in the bathroom cabinet. On the first try, Alicia held her breath so long that Henry had to tap her arm gently. Breathe. If it's not today, it'll be another day. The clock hands seemed to crawl on purpose. The result appeared clear, 1 line. Alicia swallowed the disappointment, tossed the test into the trash, closed the lid, and then looked up with a smile. It's fine. We're just getting started. Henry slipped an arm around her shoulders. Yeah, just the beginning. The seasons passed through their house like a gentle song. In summer, the backyard was alive with birdsong. Alicia woke early, snipping wildflowers to place in a glass jar on the table, humming her mother's old lullabies as she arranged them. In autumn, leaves fell in cascades, and Henry swept them into golden piles, only for the two of them to leap through them like children, laughing until they collapsed breathless. Every month, the day of waiting returned. Alicia marked more red hearts. On those right nights, they dimmed the lamps, turned off their phones, and left the world outside the door. They spoke little, just held each other longer, slower, gentler, like people placing their hands together before something sacred. Then came the mornings when Alicia checked the test. Sometimes 2 lines, most often just 1. On certain days, she lingered in the bathroom, listening to the faucet drip steadily, each drop echoing in silence. She folded the towel 1 more time, placed it neatly, and only then stepped out. Henry was always waiting at the table, tea steaming in a mug. He didn't ask right away. He simply handed the cup to her. Alicia sipped, the warmth spreading through her throat, filling the morning with a fragile comfort. She shook her head slightly. Henry smiled slightly. These little gestures, so light on their own, gathered into something unbearably heavy. It's okay, he whispered. It's okay. Yeah, Alicia nodded, placing her hand over his. We'll wait a little longer. A year passed. Red hearts now covered the fridge wall. Alicia once thought of switching to a pink marker. Softer, less anxious, she said, but in the end she still ordered red. Habit sometimes was the only thing to hold on to. They bought more test kits. This time Henry was the one who grabbed the shopping basket, dropped a large box inside, and grinned at Alicia. Buying in bulk saves us the gas money. Alicia laughed, her laughter round like a balloon, bouncing off her lips and rolling away somewhere. They walked home hand in hand beneath the fading sunset, their steps steady, like a quiet prayer. That night she gently opened the upstairs room, the one they called the cloud room. Inside, rolls of wallpaper still sat in the corner, cans of paint unopened, a white curtain hanging halfway. Alicia stood in the doorway, her hand resting on the cold doorknob. She didn't turn on the light. She let the hall lamp spill a thin line of yellow across the wooden floor. I imagine a family photo hung on that wall, she said as Henry came to stand beside her. And in that corner, a little shelf for stuffed animals. Yeah, Henry whispered. And one day we'll tell a bedtime stories here. Alicia nodded, smiling. She closed the door softly, so softly that the hinges had no time to creak. The second year came as if the first had never ended. Circles still appeared on the calendar. Alicia learned to drink more water, eat more greens, and go to bed early on heart days. Henry learned to read vague articles about basal body temperature, as well as golden windows that online forums insisted on. See? He held up his phone with mock seriousness. Someone says eating soaked almonds the night before might bring luck. Luck needs almonds now? Alicia chuckled, but that night she really did soak a small bowl of almonds. They tried everything, yet kept it gentle. No rigid schedules, no alarms buzzing, only when we're free and at peace. Alicia said, I want our child to come into a room filled with sunlight, not a countdown of 1, 2, 3. Henry nodded. Then let's just leave the windows open for the sun. Still, even in all that sunlight, a thin cloud drifted silently. Some nights Alicia woke in tears from dreams of a baby's cry echoing through the house. So vivid she jumped up, running to the hallway. But only the wind brushed the curtains, the scent of old wood lingering beneath the amber glow of the hallway light. She stood there alone, pressing her hands to her chest, coaxing the dream back into silence. In the mornings, Henry noticed her swollen eyes. He never asked, "What did you dream?" He just added an extra spoon of honey to her tea. When he handed it to her, his hand lingered against hers longer than usual. One rainy afternoon, Alicia carefully peeled off the faded red hearts from the first year, pasting them into a notebook. A new calendar hung in their place, clean and fresh, like the sigh of a page being turned. She put away the old red marker, replacing it with one with a finer tip, and wrote in the corner, "Hope, please don't grow weary." Henry came out from the kitchen, flowers still dusting his hands. "What did you write?" "I wrote to my friend," Alicia teased. "Her name is Hope." "Then I'll cook something for her," Henry replied, "so she stays strong and doesn't leave." They laughed as they always did to keep their home warm, but both of them knew worry now had its own chair by the door. It said nothing, just sat there, watching them with silent eyes. That night, before turning off the light, Henry pulled Alicia close, resting his hand on her hair. "Tomorrow, let's take out that wooden frame and dust it," he murmured, "even if it just sits there for now." Alicia nodded. She wasn't sure what picture would ever go inside the frame, nor was she sure what small footsteps would one day echo across the wooden floor. But she was sure of one thing. In Henry's arms, she heard a steady heartbeat, warm, persistent, like a drum keeping rhythm for an entire symphony. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, the cloud room remained closed, while the new calendar glowed quietly under the kitchen light. The red hearts had not yet been drawn, but the pen was ready. And somewhere between the wildflowers on the table and the honey tea still warm, Hope sat down, poured itself another cup, and whispered, "I'm still here." That morning, the clinic was so quiet that Alicia could hear the wind sweeping through the rows of trees outside the window. On the wall, a few seascape paintings softened the sterile space, but they did little to ease the tension inside her chest. Henry sat close by, his large hand wrapped around hers, his thumb tracing small circles as a silent reassurance. Dr. Rivera, a woman with gentle eyes and a calm voice, opened the file and looked at the couple. "We'll take things step by step," she said. "Many couples go through this and still find a way to make their dream of parenthood come true." Alicia nodded, clutching tightly to that fragile hope. She had been waiting for this moment for years, believing that maybe medicine only needed to give them a small push, and her dream of holding a baby in her arms would become reality. They underwent every test, blood work, ultrasounds, and countless others that Alicia couldn't remember. Henry was always by her side, holding her coat, handing her a water bottle, smiling and saying, "It's done. You did great." Inside Alicia's heart, hope was like a tender seedling, fragile, trembling, but stubbornly alive. One crisp autumn morning, golden sunlight filled their kitchen. Henry opened his phone to check work emails. Buried among them, a notification appeared. "Your test results are ready to view." He froze. Normally, they opened these results together. But that morning, for reasons he couldn't explain, an invisible force pushed him to tap it. The results page opened, the cold medical words cutting like a knife. Patient, Alicia. Congenital infertility due to ovarian malformation. Unable to conceive naturally or through assisted reproductive methods. Henry went numb. His heart pounded violently, then seemed to stop altogether. His hands shook, and the hot coffee spilled over his fingers, burning him, though he felt nothing. All sound seemed to vanish. leaving only those merciless words. He thought of Alicia, still patiently drawing red hearts on the calendar, still whispering at night about baby names she loved. He thought of the cloud room upstairs, with star-patterned wallpaper waiting to be hung, and he knew this truth would shatter her heart. Henry sat for a long time staring at the screen, his vision blurred by tears. Then, like a man desperate to protect what he loved most, he opened an editing program. He typed, deleted, and rewrote line by line. The cruel verdict, Alicia, congenital infertility, became Henry, low sperm count, reduced motility. A clumsy substitution, but to him the only way to shield Alicia from despair. He printed the altered result and locked the original away in a drawer. When Alicia's footsteps sounded on the stairs, Henry quickly slipped his phone into his pocket, wiped his hands, and pretended he had just been making breakfast. She entered the kitchen, her hair damp from washing, her eyes shimmering with expectation. "Any news yet?" she asked. Henry forced a smile, his voice steady. "Probably this afternoon. For now, just eat your breakfast." In that moment, he felt like a liar. But at the same time, he believed he was doing the only right thing. That entire day, Henry drifted through his classes like a sleepwalker. Standing before the board, explaining Romeo and Juliet, his words fell apart. In his mind, only one question echoed. If she knew the truth, would she still be able to smile? He looked at his students, young eyes still innocent and hopeful. Then he thought of Alicia, the woman who once said, "Family is life's greatest treasure." How could he be the one to wield the hammer that smashed that dream? He told himself, better she blames me. Better she thinks the fault lies with me than to leave her drowning in hopelessness. Henry pictured Alicia holding the real report, her eyes breaking apart. The thought alone made his chest ache. He could never endure that scene. That night, as Alicia slept in his arms, Henry lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The faint glow of the night lamp lit her face. Quietly, he whispered, "If someone has to bear this pain, let it be me. You just hold on to hope." A few days later, when Dr. Rivera called them in to explain the results, Henry was ready. He slipped the altered printout into the folder, making Alicia believe the issue lay with him. Alicia stared at the paper for a long time, then turned to Henry, gripping his hand tightly, her eyes heavy but resolute. "Then we'll keep trying, won't we? If it's hard, then we'll just be more persistent." Henry could only nod, his throat tight. Looking into her eyes, so bright with determination, filled him with both pain and gratitude. In that cold, sterile room smelling of antiseptic, Henry realized something. Some lies are not born to deceive, but to shield the one you love from the storm. He chose to carry it so Alicia could go on dreaming of red hearts, of the cloud room, of the laughter of children she longed for. And from that moment, Henry knew. His love was not only holding hands beneath sunsets, but stepping willingly into darkness in her place, so she could still see the light. In the days after their appointment with Dr. Rivera, the little suburban house seemed heavier than ever. Every creak of the wooden floor, every silence at the dinner table, felt covered in a haze of disappointment. Alicia tried to keep her smile, but her eyes were often rimmed red, especially whenever she walked past the cloud room, still locked. Henry knew. He could feel the storm hidden in every breath, every glance of his wife, and he knew, too, that she blamed him for their broken dream. One evening, when the only sounds left at the table were the clinks of spoons against plates, Alicia set her spoon down sharply. "I've done everything, Henry. I've followed every diet and every treatment, never missing a single appointment. And still, nothing." Henry stayed silent, eyes fixed on the plate of food gone cold. "And you," Alicia's voice trembled, her eyes glistening with tears. "Have you ever thought that if you hadn't lived so carelessly before, eating badly, sitting hunched at your desk all day, maybe by now we would already have a child?" Henry looked up, his lips parted, but no words came out. He couldn't tell her the truth. He could only nod, accepting the blame. The pain in Alicia's heart spilled over into anger. She stood up, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe I don't need a husband who can't give me the one thing I want most." The words fell like a blade, sharp and heavy. Henry sat frozen. Inside his chest, his heart felt crushed. He wanted to hold her, to shout that it wasn't his fault, that he had been trying to protect her from a devastating truth. But his throat closed tight. He only looked at her with pained eyes, then bowed his head. If you need to pour your anger onto me to ease your sorrow, then let it be so, he thought, accepting it as punishment. That night, Alicia packed a small suitcase, a few clothes, and the notebook once filled with red hearts now left empty. She left a note on the refrigerator. I need time. I'm going to my mother's. Henry found the note the next morning. He sat for hours at the kitchen table, a cold cup of tea in his hand. There was no sound of dripping coffee, no soft humming from Alicia as she prepared breakfast. The house suddenly felt cavernous, hollow. For the first time in months, he opened the cloud room. Morning light streamed across the cans of paint, the unopened wallpaper rolls, the half-hung white curtain. Henry laid his hand against the rough wall, closing his eyes. In his mind echoed Alicia's words from the night before. Maybe I don't need a husband. He swallowed hard. If bearing her anger eased her pain, he would carry it. Meanwhile, Alicia returned to her mother's wooden two-story home, where the air always carried the faint scent of cinnamon and cloves. Her mother, Elena, opened the door with a firm embrace. She didn't ask questions, only said, "Come in, dear. I just made chicken soup." That evening, Alicia sat on the back porch, her eyes vacant. Memories flooded back, every red heart on the calendar, every time she waited for a result. Now all of it had collapsed, leaving only an empty void inside her. Elena sat beside her, placing a warm bowl of soup into her hands. "My daughter," she said softly, her voice like the wind. "I know how deeply you long to be a mother. But love is not measured only by the ability to bear children." Alicia turned to her, tears spilling over. "But I've let Henry down. I've let myself down. I have nothing left to give him. You have your whole heart, your kindness, and the love you've given your husband," her mother whispered, stroking her hair. "Don't you see? Henry was always there, holding your hand through every doctor's visit. That is love. And if you cannot become a mother naturally, there are still other paths to building a family." Alicia was silent. Her mother's words fell like drops of water on parched earth. Not enough to make something bloom yet, but enough to seep into a small crack in her despair. Back in the suburban house, Henry lived alone. Each morning he brewed a cup of tea, out of habit, but left it to cool on the table. In class, he taught as usual, but his students noticed their teacher's gaze drifting farther away each day. At night, he sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty wooden frame meant for an ultrasound picture. He remembered Alicia's laughter, remembered her running into the garden with wildflowers in her hands. He asked himself, was I right to hide the truth? Or is this lie what's tearing her from me? Yet even in his doubt, Henry did not regret it. He would rather endure her anger, rather let her leave, than let her know that her own body had betrayed her dream. He chose to carry the distance between them, as punishment he believed he deserved. Alicia and Henry, two hearts once in harmony, were now divided by a crack. On one side, blame and bitterness. On the other hand, a silent love carries unbearable pain. Between them, her mother's words lingered like a small flame. Love is not measured only by the ability to bear children. Would Alicia find her way back? Would Henry have the strength to keep the secret and still hold on to the woman he loved? In the stillness of the night, neither had an answer. But the first crack had appeared, and from here, their marriage would have to weather its greatest storms. On that weekend afternoon, golden sunlight stretched across the small streets leading to the colorful home of Sophia, Alicia's cousin. In the backyard, clusters of balloons bobbed in the breeze. Strings of twinkling lights hung above, and tables covered with bright floral cloths overflowed with cakes, fruit, and lemonade. From an old speaker came lively music, mingling with the cheerful shouts of children running about. Alicia arrived early with her mother. Although she had applied light makeup and wore a pale blue dress, the sadness in her eyes was hard to hide. She knew Henry would be there today, after so many days of distance and silence. Her chest felt heavy, as if an invisible hand was gripping it tight. Henry appeared not long after. He wore the same blue shirt Alicia had given him the Christmas before. His hair was a bit longer, his face rough with stubble. He looked tired, but still carried that steady calmness about him. When their eyes met across the garden, no words came out. Yet inside Alicia, something shifted, trembling quietly. They sat at the same table, surrounded by the chatter and laughter of family. Only a few feet apart, yet it felt like 1,000 miles. The lively atmosphere didn't last long once the relatives began turning their attention toward them. "So, when will we hear some good news?" Aunt Martha asked, one hand on her hip, her tone half joking, half serious. "You two aren't getting any younger," Cousin Dora added bluntly. "Don't wait too long. Childbirth only gets harder." "That's right," Uncle Paulo chimed in with a shrug, speaking around a mouthful of cake. "Biological clocks don't wait for anyone." Each question, each careless laugh, cut into Alicia's heart like a blade. She lowered her head, her hands trembling under the table. The red hearts on the calendar, the doctor's appointments, the tears shed in the bathroom, all of it surged back at once. Henry sat beside her, his large hand closing around hers beneath the table, as if trying to steady her. But Alicia still felt suffocated, ashamed, and worst of all, guilty. When the same question was asked a fifth time, this time from Sophia herself, the birthday girl, Henry suddenly stood up. The chair scraped harshly against the tile, the sound cutting through the party like a blade. The garden went silent. All eyes turned to him. Henry drew in a deep breath, his eyes firm. His voice rang out, clear and unwavering. "I hope from now on no one asks us about children anymore. The truth is, I can't have them. I'm infertile." The air froze. The music stopped. Silence spread over the tables. Some people exchanged awkward looks, others whispered softly, while a few shook their heads with pity. Alicia went numb. Her whole body trembled, her heart racing wildly. She turned to her husband, the man who had just taken all the blame upon himself, in front of the entire family. In Henry's eyes there was no shame, only fierce determination, to shield his wife from every prying word. "So," Henry continued firmly, "I ask everyone not to bring this up again." Then he sat down, silent, his hand under the table, squeezing Alicia's once more. Alicia was stunned, tears welling in her eyes. She never expected him to say it, to bear the weight of everyone's pity so openly. A wave of sorrow and guilt crashed over her. She remembered the cruel words she had once thrown at him. "Maybe I don't need a husband who can't give me what I want most." And now here he was, turning those words into reality, not to argue back, but to protect her. Tears spilled down Alicia's cheeks. She turned her face away so no one would see, but Henry's warm, steady hand never let go of hers. The party was cloaked in heavy silence. Some relatives fumbled for new topics, others mumbled apologies. But Alicia heard none of it. She leaned closer to Henry, whispering, "Let's go home." Henry gave a slight nod, rising to his feet. They left quietly, leaving behind whispers and sidelong glances. Streetlights flashed past the car windows, casting fleeting shadows across their faces. Neither spoke. Only when they had driven out of the busy neighborhood did Alicia finally break the silence. "You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to take the blame." Henry's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I had to. I won't let anyone hurt you anymore." His voice was low but resolute. Alicia's throat tightened. Tears slipped down her cheeks, cool against her skin. She turned to look at him, and for the first time in months, she felt a faint light stir inside her, the light of love, gratitude, and aching remorse. That night in the quiet of the car, Alicia realized something. Henry wasn't just the man who once shared peaceful afternoons with her. He was the man willing to stand before the world and carry the weight of pain so that she could hold her head high. She was shaken, heartbroken, and filled with unending guilt. The crack in their marriage still remained, but through that fissure, a fragile green sprout of hope had begun to push through. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. After Sophia's birthday party, the suburban house returned to its usual quiet. But the silence no longer carried the peace of afternoons spent on the porch with iced tea. It had become an invisible wall between Henry and Alicia. They still lived under the same roof, still ate at the same old wooden table, still passed each other on the stairs. Yet their eyes, when they met, quickly darted away. Words rose to the surface only to be swallowed back, leaving a heavy emptiness hanging in the air. In the mornings, Henry woke earlier. He quietly prepared a cup of mint tea for his wife, adding a spoonful of honey, a habit he had kept since learning she often suffered from a mild sore throat. When Alicia came downstairs and saw the steaming cup waiting, her lips parted as if to say thank you. But in the end, she only sat and took a sip in silence. Henry watched her quietly, then lowered his gaze to the newspaper. His heart tightened when he noticed her fingers trembling against the handle of the cup, but he remained silent, afraid that any word might shatter the fragile balance. At night, they shared the same bed, but each turned to a different side. Only when Alicia had fallen asleep did Henry turn back, gazing at her face in the dim light. He would reach out, brushing lightly against her hair, only to pull back quickly, afraid to wake her, afraid to disturb what little rest she had. In those hazy moments between sleep and waking, Alicia sometimes felt that warmth, but she kept her eyes shut, pretending to sleep, because opening them would make the ache sharper. Still, the wall of silence occasionally showed cracks. One rainy afternoon, Alicia came home soaked from work. Henry said nothing, but hurried to fetch a towel, draping it over her shoulders and pulling a chair close to the fireplace. That clumsy gesture blurred her eyes with tears, though she only lowered her head to hide them. Another evening, Henry returned late from school. The kitchen light was on, and a bowl of hot soup sat waiting on the table. Beside it lay a small note in Alicia's familiar handwriting. "Eat while it's hot." I couldn't wait. I was too sleepy. Henry picked up the note, warmth filling his chest like a small fire in the long winter night. These gestures could not break the thick wall, but they opened narrow cracks, just enough for faint light to slip through. One day, while tidying the cloud room, Alicia came across the wooden picture frame they had once bought. She wiped the dust, staring at it for a long time. Henry passed by, pausing in the doorway. He said nothing, just walked in, picked up a cloth, and helped her clean every corner of the frame. Neither mentioned the photo that was meant to go inside, yet both silently understood. A fragment of hope still lived in their hearts. That night, before switching off the light, Henry placed a cup of hot tea on the nightstand beside Alicia. She turned slightly, her gaze trembling. For the first time in months, she whispered, "Thank you." Henry only nodded, but inside those words burned like a flame against his chest. The distance between them was stitched back, little, by these quiet acts of care. Yet the truth still hid in the shadows. Henry knew the real report lay locked in a drawer, and Alicia still believed the blame was his. Each night, Henry tormented himself. Did I do the right thing by hiding it? If one day she learns the truth, will she forgive me? But then he would glance at Alicia, asleep beside him, her breathing steady, her lips pressed softly like a child's. And he told himself, as long as she can have one more day of peace, I'll bear it all. As for Alicia, every time she held the morning tea or saw her clothes neatly folded on the bed, her chest ached. She wanted to break the wall, to embrace Henry and say, "You don't have to carry this alone." But shame, pain, and the memory of the cruel words she had spoken held her back. The little suburban house still glowed with light each night. There was still the soft sound of a teapot, the scent of hot soup, and the silent gestures of care. But between Henry and Alicia stood a wall, not high enough to block out all light, yet thick enough to keep them fumbling in the dark, searching for each other. Through those cracks, the reader could glimpse a flicker of hope, but the truth still hung above them like a heavy cloud, waiting for the day it would inevitably fall. That afternoon, rain drizzled outside the window. Alicia sat in the living room, searching for an old document for work. The laptop, unused for a long time, hummed softly as it started up. When her inbox opened, she typed a familiar keyword, laboratory. A list of emails appeared. Among them, one received many months ago, the day of destiny that had brought their fertility test results. Alicia hesitated. She remembered clearly that Henry had printed the results and handed them to her. Because she trusted him, she had never checked them for herself. Her finger trembled as it clicked on the attachment. Cold clinical words filled the screen. Patient, Alicia. Diagnosis: congenital infertility due to ovarian abnormality. Unable to conceive naturally or through medical assistance, Alicia's entire world collapsed. She stared at the screen, her heartbeat racing, then seeming to stop altogether. The letters blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, but the words didn't change. It was her. She was the one who could never be a mother. A choking sob burst from her chest. She slammed the laptop shut, clutching her head, her whole body shaking. In that moment, everything flooded back. The red hearts she had drawn on the calendar, the boxes of pregnancy tests, the whispered prayers in the night, and all the times she had blamed Henry, scolded him for not giving me what I want most. She crumpled into the couch, tears streaming, weeping like a child. For the next 3 days, Alicia barely spoke a word. Henry, worried, asked gently, "Are you feeling unwell? Do you want something to eat?" She only shook her head, retreating to their room, avoiding his eyes. At night, while Henry slept, Alicia lay turned away, muffling her sobs. She felt cruel. She had blamed him wrongly, made him carry the shame that should have been hers. Each time she remembered Henry rising at that birthday party, publicly claiming fault, Alicia's heart shattered further. He hadn't just protected her, he had sacrificed his pride, willingly bearing the pity of everyone else. On the 4th day, Alicia could no longer endure it. That evening, Henry sat in their small study, flipping through lesson plans. The weak yellow light of the desk lamp fell across his tired face, though his eyes still carried the same gentleness. Alicia stood in the doorway, clutching the back of a chair, steadying her trembling voice. "Henry!" He looked up, surprised. "What is it, love?" Alicia drew a deep breath, her voice breaking. I know everything." Henry froze. The pen slipped from his hand, clattering onto the floor. "I found the email from the clinic." Alicia's voice cracked. "I read it, and I understand why you did what you did." Silence filled the room. Henry closed his eyes, covering half his face with one hand. For a long while he said nothing, until at last his voice emerged, low and rough. "I only wanted you not to lose hope. You've dreamed of being a mother since you were a little girl. I couldn't bear to see you break." Alicia stepped closer, her eyes red and swollen. "So you took all the blame, in front of everyone." Henry nodded, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "If you needed someone to blame, let it be me. I would rather carry all your anger, as long as you could keep dreaming." Alicia dropped to her knees before him, clutching his rough hands. Tears streamed down, falling onto his skin. "Henry, I was cruel. I said words I should never have said. I blamed you when you were the one protecting me." Henry lifted her face gently. In his eyes there was no reproach, only deep love, and the exhaustion of months spent hiding the truth. "I never blamed you. I only feared you would fall apart," he whispered. "But secrets don't stay hidden forever. Maybe it's time we carried this together, instead of me carrying it alone." Alicia broke down, sobbing into his chest. All her regret, sorrow, and love spilled out in ragged cries. Henry held her tightly, soothing her as one would comfort a grieving child. In that small room, the desk lamp cast its dim glow on 2 trembling figures, locked in an embrace. After weeks of silence and misunderstanding, the truth was finally laid bare. Alicia crumbled, but in that collapse, she found a lifeline. Henry had never abandoned her. He had chosen to protect her with every ounce of love he had. The wall of silence began to crack. Amid the tears, a silent promise was planted. They would face this pain together. That night, rain still fell softly outside the porch, tapping a steady rhythm against the old tiled roof. In the small room, the golden glow of the lamp cast its light over 2 people sitting face to face. 2 hearts scarred by fractures, now trembling as they found their way back to each other. Alicia still knelt before Henry, her hands clutching his tightly. Tears streamed down her cheeks, falling onto his fingers. "Henry," she choked out. "I'm sorry, I was blind. I hurt you when all along I was the one who needed your protection." Her voice broke, every word tearing at her own heart. Henry stayed silent for a long time. His face, always controlled and composed, finally cracked. His eyes reddened, glistening with unshed tears. Alicia, he whispered, his voice unsteady, all I ever wanted was to protect you. But every time you looked at me with anger, I felt like the biggest failure in the world. He let out a strained, twisted smile, pain etched across it. And then, for the first time since their marriage, Henry cried. The sound of his sobs broke the air, rough, raw, and utterly unfamiliar to Alicia. The man she once believed unshakable, cold, and strong was now trembling in her arms. Alicia froze. Then her chest tightened painfully, as though someone had gripped her heart. She pulled him into her arms, holding him close, her own tears mingling with his. Don't cry, she whispered. You've done everything for me. You sacrificed yourself to keep my hope alive. I don't deserve that love, but I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Henry buried his face into her shoulder, letting his tears fall freely. His voice was hoarse. I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid that one day you'll look at me and see nothing but disappointment. No, Alicia interrupted, tightening her embrace. I was blind before, but now I understand. Our love cannot be measured by whether or not we can have children. It's measured by the sacrifices we've made, the tears we've shed, and the way you've held my hand through the darkest days. They sat there for a long while, the rain their only witness. Slowly, their hearts began to stitch back together, bound by the fragile thread of forgiveness. Henry lifted his gaze, his eyes still red but calmer now. Alicia, I can't promise that the road ahead will be easy, but I promise I'll always be by your side. We may never have children of our own, but we can still build a family in another way. Alicia looked deep into his eyes. In that deep blue, she saw the steadfast love she had overlooked, the devotion that had never wavered. She nodded, her voice steady. We will keep going, no matter what the path looks like. As long as I have you, I'm not afraid anymore. Henry smiled through his tears, squeezing her hand tightly. Then promise me this, no matter how hard it gets, you won't walk away again. We'll face it all together. I promise, Alicia whispered, her lips trembling. This time, from the very depths of my heart. They held each other tightly as if to erase all the distance, all the bitter words, all the suffocating silence. In that embrace, they rediscovered what mattered most, that love was greater than everything else. Outside, the rain eased. The sky opened with pale slivers of light, the moon slipping through the clouds, casting its glow through the window. The room filled with a gentle silver light, as if testifying to the rebirth of a love that had nearly been lost. Henry pressed a soft kiss to his wife's hair, whispering, Thank you for still being here. Alicia pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. In that moment, she knew they had just survived the greatest storm, and while the days ahead might not be easy, they would never again be as frightening. That night, the little house no longer echoed with silence, but with whispers instead. Two people who had stood on the brink of separation had found each other again, through tears, through forgiveness. They didn't yet know where the road ahead would lead, but they knew one thing for certain: their love was strong enough to carry them forward, even without children of their own. And sometimes true happiness isn't about having everything. It's about finding the one person willing to stay, to shoulder everything with you. After the night they had shed all their tears, Alicia and Henry felt as though they had stepped out of a thick fog. They no longer avoided each other, nor did the silence between them weigh as heavily as before. Yet both of them understood clearly. The road ahead would still be filled with challenges. Alicia refused to give up. She and Henry registered for fertility support programs. At first, they went to the hospital hand in hand, listening as doctors explained modern methods, including in vitro fertilization, egg donation, and more. Each time the words, "there may be hope," were spoken, Alicia would look at Henry with eyes that flickered with light. He would nod and smile reassuringly, even as anxiety churned inside him. But after countless hormone injections, each fragile hope rising only to shatter again, they returned home each time with emptier hearts. One evening, Alicia sat in the kitchen, clutching a pregnancy test that showed negative once more. Henry walked over and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "You've done everything you could," he whispered. "This is not your fault." Tears streamed down Alicia's face, soaking his hand. Her voice trembled. I just want, at least once, to hear someone call me Mom. Henry pulled her into his arms, his heart twisting painfully. He knew how immense her love was for this dream. One day, Dr. Rivera suggested softly, would you consider joining a support group? There are many couples who have walked the same path. Hearing their stories might help. Alicia and Henry agreed. On Saturday afternoon, they arrived at a small room in a community center. Couples sat in a circle, their eyes hesitant at first. But as the conversation flowed, empathy quickly spread among them. A curly-haired woman sitting beside Alicia spoke, her voice low and heavy. I tried for 10 years with every method available. Ultimately, we adopted a 6-year-old girl. At first, I was afraid I wouldn't love her the same way I would a biological child. But then, the first time she called me Mom, I knew my heart had always belonged to her. Alicia froze. Those words struck her like a mirror held up to her own soul. Henry, sitting beside her, squeezed her hand gently. His eyes said what his lips didn't. We could do this too. That night, Alicia lay awake. Her mind replayed the stories of the couples she had met, the woman's voice, and Henry's shining eyes when adoption was mentioned. I don't know if I could do it, she confessed in the dark, her voice trembling. What if the child doesn't see me as their mother? What if I can't feel that bond? Henry took her hand and answered softly. Family doesn't always begin with blood. It begins with love, and I believe that your love is strong enough to reach every child. Alicia fell silent, her tears slipping down quietly. Inside her heart, a fragile seed of hope began to sprout. A few weeks later, Alicia began researching the adoption process herself. She printed out documents, highlighting the important lines. When Henry walked into the living room and saw her surrounded by papers, he smiled gently. I think we should try, Alicia said, her voice still trembling, but her eyes steady. Maybe this is the path meant for us. Henry sat down beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Thank you, he whispered. Whatever path it is, as long as you're with me, I know we'll find our family. Alicia looked up, and for the first time in months, a true smile bloomed on her lips. In that moment, they no longer saw the pain of failed attempts, nor the haunting image of the still locked cloud room. They saw the future, a home filled with laughter, a dining table with extra little chopsticks and hearts that were no longer empty. The path of having children by blood had closed, but another road was opening before them. Although there was still hesitation and obstacles, both Henry and Alicia began to believe. Family is built from love, not just blood. And in their small house, for the first time in so long, the light that fell across their faces was lit by hope. A new chapter of their journey toward parenthood had begun, not through blood, but through love. Time passed, and the wounds of the heart slowly faded into the background. Alicia now lived in the rhythm of blossoms as her little flower shop, Little Miracles, opened right on the porch of their home. It was the dream she had nurtured since her days as a waitress, now finally real. Every afternoon, Henry would come home from teaching and stop by the shop to help his wife tidy up, label bouquets, and sweep the floor. He often teased, by day, I'm a teacher, and by night, I'm my wife's flower shop assistant. Alicia would smile, her heart warm, as though life was gently returning to its peaceful rhythm. The first child to enter their lives was Mia, a 7-year-old. On the day they met, Mia sat curled up in the corner of a chair, clutching a tattered doll with a torn dress and tangled hair. Her wide brown eyes were heavy with sadness, like closed doors that refused to open. Alicia didn't rush. She gently placed a bouquet of white baby's breath on the table and whispered, Do you like flowers? They're small, but they can make a whole room brighter. Mia reached out and touched a petal, so delicately as if she feared it might break. For the briefest moment, a tiny smile flickered across her face, and in that instant, Alicia knew. The child's heart had begun to open. When Mia came home with them, she carried nothing but an old purple backpack with a few clothes, a ragged storybook, and that doll. Alicia wrapped her arms around her and said softly, From now on, you can let your doll rest on the shelf, because Mommy will always be here to hold you. Not long after, they welcomed Lucas, a bright-eyed 5-year-old boy with an infectious smile. The first time he saw Henry, he exclaimed, Hello, teacher! Henry and Alicia both burst out laughing. Lucas had learned Henry was a teacher, and for the whole first week, he called him teacher instead of dad. Henry never corrected him, he simply waited patiently. One night, as Henry was reading a bedtime story, Lucas leaned against his chest and whispered, "Dad, keep reading." Henry froze, his eyes instantly blurring with tears. He wrapped his arms around his son, continuing the story in a trembling voice. From the doorway, Alicia stood with a fresh bouquet of roses in her arms, quietly wiping away her own tears of joy. A year later, the adoption center introduced them to Olivia, a gentle 6-year-old girl. She was soft-spoken, her clear eyes shadowed by the constant fear of being abandoned. The moment she stepped inside their home, Olivia clutched Alicia's hand tightly and whispered, "Are you sure you won't send me away?" Alicia knelt down, meeting her eyes, and pulled the child into a firm embrace. "No one will ever take you away from this family again. From now on, you truly have a home." Henry came closer, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. His tone was solemn but kind. "You don't just have a mom, you have a dad and siblings too. Our family is complete now." Olivia hesitated, then finally smiled for the first time, like a shy flower blooming in the early sun. The once-old house, where the cloud room had stayed locked for so long, now echoed with the patter of little feet. The walls were covered with star-patterned wallpaper, the floor scattered with crayons and toy cars. Mia carefully dressed her doll in a new gown that Alicia had sewn by hand. Lucas ran circles around the house, showing off his drawings of the whole family. Olivia sat by the window, reading a book aloud to her siblings in a bright sing-song voice. The garden outside transformed as well. Once filled only with wild grass, it now bore the marks of little footprints and rang with endless bursts of laughter beneath the trees. Alicia stood on the porch, a bouquet of freshly cut roses in her hands. Henry came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Do you see it?" he whispered. "The dream is different, but it's still whole." Alicia leaned her head on his shoulder, her eyes shimmering. "Yes, this is the home I always prayed for." The old house, once shadowed by silence and tears, had become a haven overflowing with sunlight and laughter. Mia, Lucas, and Olivia, 3 perfect pieces, had filled the empty spaces in Henry and Alicia's hearts. Family doesn't require shared blood to be real. Family is woven from love, from arms that embrace, and from the promise, we will never leave each other. A complete home, not extravagant, not perfect, but overflowing with love. It was a golden summer afternoon, sunlight spilling like honey over the flower beds in the garden. The scent of fresh grass mingled with roses and carnations from Alicia's little shop. Little miracles, weaving together a sweet hymn of life. The garden was alive with laughter. Mia sat cross-legged on the grass, carefully fastening a new dress onto her old doll, the only toy she had carried with her the day she first arrived at their home. Her face was serious, but at the corners of her lips bloomed a gentle smile. Not far away, Lucas, bare-chested and holding a water gun, darted between the daisies. His voice rang out as he shouted, "Catch me if you can, teacher. Only then will you be the real superhero." Henry laughed heartily, rolling up his sleeves and pretending to chase him, letting the boy's shrieks of delight ripple across the yard. Meanwhile, Olivia, the gentle 6-year-old, sat on the swing with a book in hand, reading aloud as if her voice itself was a song of summer. No one cared about the words on the page, only that her clear, lilting voice carried a peace that filled the garden. From the porch, Alicia stood holding a bouquet of freshly cut roses. Her eyes followed the 3 children, and her heart clenched, not from pain as it once had, but from a fullness so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. The old house was no longer the same. The cloud room, once locked away in silence, had become a sanctuary of color and joy. Its walls were covered in star-patterned paper, its windows draped with pale blue curtains, and the floor scattered with crayons, toy cars, and open storybooks. Mornings now began with the thunder of little feet, squabbles over pastries, Lucas proudly displaying his superhero drawings, and Olivia scolding him with a giggle. "Eat slower!" Evenings ended with the family gathered on the porch while fireflies blinked in the garden. Henry read stories in his deep, steady voice. Alicia beside him, Mia's head resting on her mother's shoulder, Lucas sprawled across the rug, and Olivia correcting her father whenever he read the wrong way. There was no room left for sorrow in this house. It was filled with laughter, voices calling out Mom and Dad, and little arms holding tight. That very afternoon when Lucas tripped on the grass and fell, Olivia rushed to help him up, while Mia set her doll aside and brushed dirt from his cheek. The three of them fussed over one another with the kind of fierce loyalty that only family could bring. Alicia's tears slipped free again. Henry came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. His warmth steadied her trembling, and she whispered, voice choked with joy, "Look at them. They are our children." Henry pressed his cheek against her hair. When Alicia lifted her gaze, she saw in his eyes the same tender light she had fallen for years ago. The light that once shone across a diner counter when he quietly watched her scribbling down orders in her notebook. "Yes," Henry said firmly, smiling. "They are ours, our family." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the bright laughter of their children weaving through the garden, mingling with the rustling of the trees. They had once thought happiness meant a nursery filled with toys, a calendar covered in little red hearts, a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines. But fate had led them down another road, a longer, harsher one, that still somehow brought them home to the place their hearts had always longed for. They finally understood. True love doesn't need to be perfect. Happiness isn't having everything. It's holding hands through every loss. Family isn't defined by blood, but by love, forgiveness, and the courage never to let go. Henry had once borne the weight of every sorrow just to shield Alicia. Alicia had once wept until empty, only to discover love mattered more than broken dreams. And together, they had built something new, something whole. As the sun sank low behind the trees, golden light spread across the garden. The three children still ran and laughed, their voices a song of endless summer. The wind stirred the branches above, sounding like the applause of the heavens for this little family. Leaning against Henry's shoulder, Alicia's eyes shimmered with tears, but her smile was radiant. "I think, at last, we've found the true meaning of love." Henry squeezed her gently, whispering, "And it's right here, in our children's laughter, in your arms." They kissed beneath the fading light, while Mia, Lucas, and Olivia's laughter echoed through the garden, carrying high into the dusk. The old house had become a true home, and in that moment, Alicia knew with certainty, family isn't born from blood, it is born from love. Thank you for being part of Soul Stories. If you're listening on another channel, come back to the official home so you can continue our love journeys together with the Soul Stories family.